a lot of what Trump is doing today, while it is insane and belligerent seemingly and causes a lot of instability in the markets, what Trump is doing directionally is the same thing that previous administrations have been trying to do as well. But they don't have the same appetite for death and destruction that Donald Trump has, because Trump believes he can actually tank it. All right? That's the major difference here. Trump believes, perhaps foolishly, that he can tank it. But the goal here is the same: decoupling our largest trading partner, and forcibly severing ties with China, and also rebuilding American manufacturing. Not because you care about the industrial base, not because you care about the manufacturing jobs coming over here. That's why they openly say, I don't give a we're going to build it cheap. We're going to build it with robots. Okay? They say a bunch of fantastic things, right? The only reason why they care about building a manufacturing base in the United States of America is because building a manufacturing base in the United States of America is because of national security concerns. The American government does not care about improving labor. The American government does not care about fixing the problems of inequality here. They only care about national security. They only care about national security. They want to build here so that China can't just turn off the manufacturing faucet and destroy the American empire when we go to war with them. That is the point. That is the major reason. Okay, we want to go to war with China, and we can't go to war with China when we are so reliant on Chinese manufacturing. That's it. And a part of that, a part of resetting the global economy that we have designed to rely on goods being manufactured overseas, is to change the parity of the dollar, to change the currency exchange rate of the dollar and readjust it and devalue the purchasing power that the dollar has. That is what he wants to do. Okay, that's a part of what he wants to do. This is always going to be a painful process. Okay, it is not only always going to be a painful process, this was always going to be a painful process. It was always going to cause market volatility. Okay, and I think Donald Trump is getting some of his wishes in the process. Will he be able to actually achieve his goals? No, I don't think he'll be able to actually rebuild manufacturing here. But if you want to understand what their goals are overall, Arnaud Bertrand actually summarized the insanity perfectly. Okay, I agree. This is my assessment as well. I'm using this as a baseline, as a summarization, because this is basically everything that I've been talking about for the past couple of weeks now at this point. This is an analysis of Steve Moran, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the man perhaps most responsible for these decisions beyond everybody else in the administration that you've heard from. Okay? I showed you his 5 bullet points of what their expectations are from foreign nations already. And I think that is what they're trying to do. All of these back and forth, all these conversations that are taking place with all of our trade partners, all of our allies over the course of the past couple of days is just this, making sure that they start moving in the direction of doing these 5 points in some meaningful capacity. White House aide Stephen Moran outlines 5 potential responses foreign nations can undertake in response to the problems he says are caused by U.S. dollar dominance. By the way, I do want to point something out here. Notice how little attention this stuff gets, because this is the real shit, okay? It's not Howard Lutnick. It's not Navarro. It's not Scott Bessent. It's not Elon Musk. This is the actual plan, and yet it gets very little coverage and very little attention. It's like shocking to me that all of these brilliant analysts are still, seemingly brilliant analysts, and these economists are still focusing on the smoke and mirrors. This is the reality. This is what they're trying to do. 1, foreign countries can accept tariffs without retaliation, giving U.S. revenue. Okay? This is stupid. That's not how tariffs work. That's not how it would have worked at all. It would just be the entry fee that the Americans are paying for. But that's the point. That's what they're saying. Okay? They can stop unfair, harmful trading practices and buy more from the United States. The real goal here is to buy more from the United States. That's what they want. They want these countries by force to purchase more American products. Do we have the capability of manufacturing more products that they can buy? Maybe. Probably not, especially not in the short term. But that's precisely what they want to do. They want to literally sell our salmonella chicken and our hormone beef and our F-150s to every single country that will buy it. Every single country that doesn't want to buy it, but they have to buy it. It's basically like demanding an additional fee out of our loyal subjects in the global economy that we designed, where they became our manufacturing hubs, and now we want more back from them for even participating in the global system that we designed that did not even benefit them in the same way that it benefited us. Yeah, they want vassals to pay tribute. They want the vassals to pay extra tribute. That's precisely what this is. That is what is going on here. Number 3, boost defense spending and procurement from the United States. What is a major sector where we have manufacturing capabilities? Weapons. We want you to forcibly buy our weapons. You might not have use for those weapons, but you're going to buy them and you're going to like them. Okay? You have to, because that's what we make. That's the only thing we make. We make bombs. So you have to buy our bombs. Okay? And then, last but not least, turn around and take the crumbs that you have of foreign capital that you've brought back into your country and then reinvest that to make factories in the United States of America. And last but not least, you can write direct checks to the U.S. Treasury. This is the most psychotic part of the 5-point plan, okay? What an insane list of demands. But those are the demands nonetheless, okay? Don't listen to the noise in the market. Don't listen to the market instability. Don't listen to anything else. This is literally what they are demanding. Arnaud writes, that's batshit insane, no other way to call it. We now have the first attempt by the White House, specifically by Steve Moran, the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, to justify the tariffs based on economic theory, and it is without a doubt the most dishonest piece of economic reading that I've ever had the misfortune to lay my eyes upon. The gist of Moran's argument is to reposition the global reserve currency status of the dollar not as an exorbitant privilege, which it is, okay, because that is the major power that the United States of America has. The dollar is the reserve currency. All trade happens on the dollar. 80% of trade happens on the dollar. This gives us, the United States of America, unimaginable power over everything that happens on the planet. This is how we can shut off other markets from even participating in global trade. This is the super weapon, okay? And not only have we grown fat with this super weapon, not only do we not have any of the outside pressures because we technically have a sovereign currency and the sovereign currency that is the global trade currency, that we can just print money without any of the other side effects. We can just do whatever the we want. And now, this incredible privilege that we have designed around the globe, okay, that we've used to dominate the entire planet, that's being treated as though it's a burden that the rest of the world needs to compensate the U.S. for bearing. And you want to know what the crazy part about this is? Our European allies do actually see this as a not necessarily a burden, but a cost of doing business, because they are also invested in the maintenance of capitalism and therefore historically have been terrified of the growth of socialism within the USSR. So they've gladly played the role of a vassal state for the United States of America and its empire. And now they're doing the same thing because they're terrified of China for the same exact reason. Okay? For EU leadership, don't listen to what they're saying right now. I promise you. For European leadership, they see America as an unstable, dangerous partner, but at least America is still capitalist and will maintain capitalism. The Chinese might do something very scary and do socialism. We cannot let that happen. And, you know, we have to also still align with America. America knows that that is the major pressure that they can apply to European capitalists. And therefore, Europe will pay tribute. One of the biggest trade inefficiencies that Donald Trump considers to be cheating, Europe also considers to be cheating. Okay? Ursula von der Leyen, if you recall, a year ago, as I famously brought up on this broadcast and keep bringing up on this broadcast time and time again, complained about China cheating with electric vehicles. What was that cheating? Subsidies. The Chinese industry is a command economy and therefore is controlled by the state. So the state can adjust prices and pump subsidies into its private corporations that are still maintained by the government by way of banks that the government also owns and controls, and therefore can flood the market with incredibly affordable, competitive products. This will destroy European manufacturing. Europe considers that to be cheating. Central planning is considered cheating under global trade rules. Understand that. Every person that is an economist that at least deals with the political economy will tell you that they consider what China is doing to be cheating because they are not playing by the rules of the free markets. Every country does subsidies to a certain degree. Every country maybe expands on said subsidies to a certain degree to ensure that their cost of production is low and the price points are low. But it is hilarious that they consider what China is doing to be cheating in terms of global trade because they're not participating in the free market principles that they are supposed to be participating in. It's insane. So instead of turning around and going, why don't we also have a command economy? They go, hey, you guys have kept prices far too low for our consumers, and that's us up. That's our manufacturing up. This is the truth. I need you to understand. Don't listen to anything else. This is unironically what these dumbasses believe. As Moran explains it, having the dollar as reserve currency has caused persistent currency distortions and contributed, along with other countries' unfair barriers to trade, to unsustainable trade deficits, which has decimated our manufacturing sector. That's what Stephen Moran says. Dollar being the reserve currency is used against the United States of America. Other countries devalue their currency against the dollar and then turn around and are able to export a lot more to the United States of America than the United States of America exports to the rest of the world because America has more purchasing power. When you have more purchasing power, then you become an economy that is a consumer rather than a producer. This is what Donald Trump talks about with respect to trade deficits. So basically, under this, if that was your major gripe here, you would obviously no longer make the dollar the reserve currency, right? Except wrong. They want to maintain the dollar as the reserve currency. They just also want you to pay for the privilege of our currency still being the reserve currency, because the alternative is the yuan, and that is terrifying. They literally are saying, you either want us to keep dominating global trade and make these decisions at the behest of capital earners or capital owners, or something much scarier can happen and China will dominate global trade. And in that situation, who knows what will happen? Who knows what will happen? So you have to pay us even more, despite the fact that this is a system that we designed. This is a system that we benefit from. This is a system that has allowed the United States of America to become a consumption engine without even doing any manufacturing whatsoever. This is a part of the process with the labor aristocracy. When adjusted to those who have wealth versus those who do not internally inside of the United States of America, there's great wealth inequality. But there is a severe disparity of wealth and even income when you look at the American working class as opposed to someone growing up anywhere else, even in Europe, as a matter of fact. We rigged the game so that our capital owners could drive up super profits as we literally enslaved the global South to get cheap, accessible commodities at an incredibly low price. And now we're saying, well, we don't like this anymore. We don't like the system anymore. And the real problem here is China. What Donald Trump refuses to admit, and what many capitalists refuse to admit as a consequence of their dogmatic ways of approaching the capitalist economy and the capitalist structure of commodity production is that the enemy is not China. The enemy is not Europe. The enemy is global capital. That's it. It's global capital that designed the system, and it's global capital that will make money off of the restructuring of the system. But because they do not want to recognize that reality, and they will never recognize that reality, their entire purpose is not to recognize that reality. Some of them are a part of the global capitalist structure anyway, that they turn around and make these insane decisions. Moran says that America's financial dominance cannot be taken for granted, and the Trump administration is determined to preserve it, but this same financial dominance comes at a cost, and other nations need to pay for it. He means this literally. He made a list of what he exactly means by burden sharing, and one of the forms it can take is countries simply writing checks to the Treasury that help us finance global public goods. Let's pause for a moment here to contemplate the sheer insanity of this, says Arnaud. The U.S. is literally suggesting that countries should mail checks to the U.S. Treasury as a tribute for the privilege of maintaining the dollar as a global reserve currency, when it is this very reserve status of the dollar that is the cornerstone of U.S. power. It's the equivalent of Samson asking everyone to pay him to keep his hair, because that's what Moran is conveniently not mentioning in his text. The reason Giscard d'Estaing called it exorbitant privilege in terms of the United States being the global currency, the reserve currency, is that it allowed the U.S. to quite literally have its way of life subsidized by the rest of the world. Moran and Trump complain about the trade deficits, but they are the very manifestation of this subsidization. Countries normally cannot run on a permanent trade deficit because they'd one day face a balance of payment crisis. But America does not face this crisis because America is the United States of America. They dominate the world. There is no shorting the American government, because if the dollar was no longer reliable, if people lost confidence in it, that means the entire global economy has collapsed. Okay? It's like a private individual. You cannot indefinitely buy more from others than what you yourself earn. At some point, you'll have to pay up, unless that is you are the issuer of currency that everybody uses, in which case the normal rules of economic gravity are suspended. While other nations must balance their books eventually, the dollar's reserve status gives America the unique ability to consume more than it produces perpetually, with the world eagerly accepting dollars that cost nothing to create in exchange for real goods and services. That's not a burden. It's very much an exorbitant privilege. So yes, sure, because America can effectively buy most of what it needs from the rest of the world for free by printing dollars, this situation doesn't exactly create incentives to do the hard work of manufacturing goods domestically. But framing this as other countries taking advantage of America rather than America taking advantage of its currency dominance is an astonishing inversion of reality. There's also a bunch of insane lies that they spread about China in this process as well. One of them was the 2008 housing market crash, claiming that China actually contributed to the 2008 housing market crash. It wasn't our deregulation of the financial sector. No, not at all. It was actually China that did the 2008 housing market crash. What a spectacular lie to say, especially to add insult to injury, that it was China that bailed out the United States of America. China literally participated in saving America in the aftermath of the 2008 housing market crash. That is crazy. We are so goddamn belligerent, dude. We are such rabid animals. It blows my mind. But in any case, let's get back to it. While other nations must balance their books, eventually the dollar's reserve status gives America the unique ability to consume more. Okay? So yes, sure, because America can effectively buy most of what it needs from the rest of the world for free by printing dollars, this situation doesn't exactly create incentives to do the hard work of manufacturing goods domestically, but framing this as countries taking advantage of America rather than America taking advantage of its currency dominance is an astonishing inversion of reality. And even more astonishing is Moran's ask that countries now compensate the U.S. for this. Some people mention that it's like asking vassals for tribute, but it's actually even worse than this. The tribute is already embedded in the global reserve currency status of the dollar. Other countries work hard for the U.S. while they can just issue IOUs that never come due. It's kept together by 800 military bases around the planet. What Moran is thus proposing is effectively demanding vassals make payments for the privilege of already making payments, a double tribute system where countries can first subsidize American living standards by accepting dollars as reserves and then must pay an additional fee for this burden this supposedly places on the U.S. This chatter is correct. This is literally, have you said thank you? But this time, instead of yelling at Ukraine for engaging in a proxy battle that suits our interests in the region against a foreign adversary and demanding more from them in terms of natural resources and demanding that they basically put their arms down and let Russia dominate them now that we're just bored. Okay? This is ironically that exact same principle being played out in terms of global trade. And it's wild that a lot of Americans do not even comprehend this reality. I mean, I guess it's not that wild because this is somewhat complex. And it's also a part of the process of being the hegemonic superpower where you take this for granted. This is literally just the way things are. What do you mean? Moran's piece is replete with other complete inversions of reality. For instance, he now blames China for the 2008 crash because their holdings of U.S. mortgage debt helped fuel the housing bubble, forcing hundreds of billions of dollars of credit into the housing sector without regard as to whether the investments made sense. They're saying China is the reason for the 2008 market crash. How psychotic. Anyone even with a rudimentary knowledge of the 2008 financial crisis would have had their breath taken away by such brazen revisionism. Not only is the crisis universally known to have been caused by U.S. regulatory failures and the reckless securitization of subprime mortgages by Wall Street firms, but China in this instance literally saved U.S. markets from complete meltdown after Hank Paulson personally appealed to Beijing to continue purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds during the height of the crisis, which they did. To now blame them for the very crisis they helped mitigate and played no part in creating is beyond dishonest, is gaslighting on a geopolitical scale. All in all, it is clear what the U.S. is trying to achieve here. They effectively want to have their cake and eat it. They want to keep the privilege and want the rest of the world to pay for the downsides that come with it, which means we're truly at a crossroads in history where nations must make an immensely consequential choice: acquiescence to this insane double tribute system or stand against it. There are very few precedents in world history for such nakedly exploitative power plays, but history is very clear on two things. Submitting to extortion only invites more of it, and collective resistance is the only effective response. Now, here's what I think. Our vassals will pay the double tribute, and China might even in the short term play ball, and it will still end in failure. Okay? So Donald Trump might literally get his wishes across. And the major reason as to why, especially from the perspective of our vassals paying double tribute now, is because they're terrified, especially EU, is terrified of the entire structure of the planet, the entire political economy, the entire global trade changing. The rule makers being the United States of America means that capitalism continues. If the rule makers become China, then capital owners are going to lose out big. They're going to lose their status. They're going to lose the way that these hierarchies have been designed. Because if China makes the rules, then everyone has to subsidize their industries to the same degree. They have to have state-run companies to be able to compete with China if there is any sort of competition in global trade at all at that point. Therefore, there's no more capitalism effectively. Or at least capitalism does not work in the ways that it has for as long as it has worked, as long as America has been the dominant power around the globe. Because the dominant power, the hegemonic power, writes the rules for trade. And they get to violate those rules, but it doesn't matter because they're the dominant power. America technically hasn't really violated the rules all that much because of endless greed. Because it's not like our state doesn't subsidize industries heavily. It's not like we don't rely on U.S. aid, for example, which is literally a mechanism to destabilize the global south to ensure that they do not have their own agricultural output. It is a way for us. It is a way for our farmers that already get subsidies, and also farm subsidies or agriculture is not even considered a part of the rules of global trade anyway. But it's just one example that I'm giving you. In terms of how America will, one, subsidize our agricultural output, and then two, pay farmers to literally give the agricultural output to other countries for free, which ends up destabilizing those countries and causes them to not build their own domestic agricultural outputs and become over reliant on American farmers shipping the agricultural output. Instead, it creates dependency. But outside of that, America also heavily subsidizes all manufacturing in this country. The problem is, under normal circumstances, if those subsidies actually led to much cheaper goods being produced here in the United States of America, if those subsidies actually worked in the same way that it does in China, for example, to offer much more affordable vehicles, for example, okay, vehicles that these other countries want, then yes, America technically would be cheating as well. But they don't do that. What do people do with the subsidies? The subsidies don't make its way to more affordable products. The subsidies don't actually work in the way that it's intended. The subsidies go back to stock buybacks. And therefore, America seemingly doesn't cheat in the global on the global stage because they pocket them. Because since the Reagan era, it is no longer illegal to engage in stock buybacks. That's it. Now, one of the reasons as to why I keep saying that this will still ultimately be a failure, okay? This will ultimately still be a failure, is because America is not China. In the long term, this will still fail because America does not have a command economy. That is the entire point, because the real enemies here, and Trump kind of recognized this as well, okay? But the real enemy here is not China. The real enemy is global capital. These people are supranational actors. They are not actually a part of the nation state. That's why Apple pays taxes, even though they dodge taxes there as well, in Ireland, okay? There is no national allegiance. That's not a real thing. Global capitalism has global capitalism and global trade, and the way that America has designed global trade at the behest of capital owners has made it so that there is no real national understanding for capitalists. Directly, this is a universal class war against capital owners that do not have any sort of allegiance or loyalty to a singular nation versus the entirety of the global labor force. So if you actually wanted to fix this process and truly wanted to improve American manufacturing, you would work by improving the American labor force. You would work by improving the material conditions of the American labor force and rebuild labor unions, for example, to create a mechanism of pushback against capital. But Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. He's doing the exact opposite. Donald Trump also and his administration routinely admit that they are not even interested in bringing manufacturing back into the United States of America for no reason other than the fact that they don't want China to have it, because they're worried that China could shut off the manufacturing faucet in times of war. So they keep saying, we're just going to build robots. It's going to be cheap because robots are going to build the factories and robots are going to build the manufacturing. Automation and AI is going to make all of this work. That doesn't mean you get a job at the factory. And this is before you think, well, there are already jobs in this country. The problem is not jobs. The problem is that those jobs don't pay. The problem is that no one fantasizes about working at a factory for the sake of working in the factory alone. People fantasize about working in a factory because they fantasize about 1965 living standards. That's what they want. They want benefits. They want a single income household to be able to pay for all of the children. They want a upward social mobility for their next generation. Many of you that now work white-collar jobs probably had blue-collar parents. And the one thing that blue-collar parents probably told you was, hey, I'm doing everything in my power so you don't have to go work at a goddamn factory because this sucks. My back is broken. I'm constantly medicated. I don't want this future for you. I want you to have a better future. The irony, of course, is that the issue here is not the factory job itself, but instead the fact that jobs don't pay, the fact that there is an affordability crisis, the fact that housing is impossible to achieve, the fact that you will never retire. That is the real problem. We have jobs. We have 23% underemployment in this country right now. We could fix those problems. But, of course, that would require restructuring the way that we depend on maintaining capitalism as the established order. We cannot remove the capitalist dogmatic thought from our minds. We will never be able to do that. The entire system itself is designed around uplifting and maintaining capitalism. That's it. So let's hear from Yanis Varoufakis, who I believe was correct on his assessment of what Trump was trying to do.
Trump, the American dollar, and China. What to watch for during 2025. Donald Trump wants to boost exports, to bring American jobs back to the United States, and to shrink the American trade deficit. For that, he needs a lower value of the dollar. For that, he needs a weaker dollar. But at the same time, Donald Trump wants a strong dollar, and he will not brook any discussion of ending the exorbitant privilege, the centrality, the hegemony, the dominance of the American dollar in international transactions. Can Donald Trump possibly have both? Donald Trump's first problem is that the tariffs that he has invested so much political capital in introducing, announcing, and advocating for will most likely boost the value of the dollar. Why? Primarily because every time there is global uncertainty, whenever there is a problem that emanates from the United States, whether that was the 2008 crisis or whatever crisis there is a paradoxical rush of foreign money into the United States, boosting the dollar. So if Trump's tariffs create global uncertainty, the likely outcome will be an increased value of the dollar. And that's his first problem, because if his tariffs succeed in creating a lot of consternation across the world, in China, in the European Union, in Britain, the result will be that even if imports initially shrink as a result of these large tariffs, the influx of money into the United States of capital is going to boost the value of the dollar, therefore countering whatever effects the tariffs had on limiting imports and enhancing American exports. Donald Trump's second problem is that if he proceeds with his very large tax cuts, especially for corporations and the oligarchs and the very rich in the United States, this is also going to attract into the United States foreign capital. And what will that do? Boost the value of the dollar, and therefore enhance the gap between American savings and investment, with investment being much greater than savings, which is a root cause of the American trade deficit. Trump's third problem is the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. It is the reason why every time there is a crisis, especially one emanating from within the United States, the dollar goes up and the US trade deficit gets worse, especially during...
This video was uploaded 3 months ago. And Yanis Varoufakis has been calling this out for quite some time at this point. And last night I came to the realization that I think he is correct on his assessment that Donald Trump wants to devalue the dollar in an effort to rebalance trade. As in, Donald Trump wants, simply put, Donald Trump wants to make America poorer. Donald Trump wants to make Americans poorer than they were yesterday so that the poor Americans will be able to manufacture goods just so we can maintain manufacturing domestically for national security concerns. That's their assessment, not mine. And be able to produce more product for the rest of the world to purchase. Donald Trump is not smart enough for any of this 3D chess? Yes, because Donald Trump is not personally doing this, chatter. Please. Just like Joe Biden wasn't personally doing his brain is doo-doo. Donald Trump's brain is doo-doo. And so is Joe Biden's brain. It's not actually what Donald Trump's... Donald Trump is not making these decisions. People around him are. He is just the guy who is the messenger. He is the vessel.
In periods of reduced demand, jobs, and employment within the United States. So if Donald Trump were serious about shrinking the American trade deficit, he would want to do away with the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. But of course, not only will he never allow himself to do that, because his best friends, his tribe, are the rentiers and the financiers, who will be aghast if the United States loses the exorbitant privilege of its dollar. It is highly unlikely that Donald Trump will want to be the first American president after the Second World War that loses the hegemonic power of the United States by losing the exorbitant privilege of the United States dollar. Some argue, and I think they do have a point, that
this doesn't make sense. You can't devalue the dollar without inducing hyperinflation and tax cuts strengthen the dollar. What does he gain from a weak dollar exactly? Yeah, that's why he's saying it's stupid if he does tax cuts after this as well. But what does he gain from a weak dollar is basically nothing. I mean, there's no immediate gain aside from the fact that a weaker dollar overall means that you can rebalance trade to a certain degree, because the products that we're building here and selling to the rest of the world become more affordable automatically, because all currency is traded against the dollar. So if a country's a currency is devalued against the dollar and the dollar's purchasing power is high, then that country still has jobs. That country still has manufacturing, and that country can export to the United States of America. If the dollar is weak or weaker than it was, then Americans don't have the same purchasing power in the international market that we have benefited from in perpetuity. But instead, we manufacture things that other countries can purchase from us.
Maybe what he's trying to do, what Donald Trump is trying to do, is he is threatening the world, China and the European Union in particular, with very large tariffs in order to come to an arrangement with them to accept a depreciation of the Chinese yuan, of the euro, of competing currencies, in order for the United States to see its exports rise and its imports diminish. To cut a deal, in other words, something along the lines of what Ronald Reagan did in 1985, the infamous Plaza Accords, supposedly a multilateral meeting between the Europeans, the Americans, the Canadians, the Australians. But in reality, what the Plaza Accords were about was an ultimatum by Washington on Tokyo. Appreciate the yen massively, or else I'm going to slap large tariffs on Japanese exports. The Japanese are rolled over. They did as a...
So remember what I said about how Donald Trump wants to do Plaza Accords to the rest of the world? Ironically, when I was in Japan and we were talking about the tariffs, that's what this is. Problem is, I don't think you can do that to China. I don't think you can do that to the EU. They'll roll over because they have additional concerns about the American dominance going away. If America is no longer the hegemonic superpower, then that breeds instability for capital owners in general. And this entire system is designed so that capital owners are never unstable and on shaky ground. But I do think that a lot of the countries will play ball with this. I think so. I think they will. I think they're too scared of. They're more scared of what it means if China is the hegemonic power than America being the hegemonic power, because America being the hegemonic power means capitalism continues. And these guys are short-sighted. That capitalism and capitalist dogma implies you have to be short-sighted. You have to think in quarters. So they're so afraid of a change to not just who gets to make the rules, but also what those new rules might look like, that I think they will remain servile to American interests in this process.
They were told. The reason why Japan's massive growth rates between 1950 and 1985 were eliminated, and why Japan lost its verve, its dynamism, was because they accepted those Plaza Accords. Is China likely to accept a new Plaza Accords? I assign a 0 probability to that possibility. China is no Japan. Japan was an occupied country by the United States. Yeah. The United States wrote its constitution. There are tens of thousands of American soldiers still occupying Okinawa. China, I will repeat this once more, is not Japan. It is highly unlikely that they will accept, at a time when the capital account of China, if anything, would recommend from an economic point of view a depreciation of the yuan. They will never accept a massive appreciation of the kind that would make the difference for the United States trade deficit in the way that Donald Trump would like. So this is pie in the...
You think China becoming the world power would degrade their current political structure? Yes, even within a capitalist framework, it still would do that. Because if you look at global trade as competitive market forces inside of different countries, fighting with the same rule book that has been designed by the United States of America, China becoming the hegemonic leader of global markets means that other countries have to follow suit, which means by force, other countries also have to restructure their economies to a command economy. Ironically, the reason why they don't have to do that right now is because America sets the standard. America sets the standard for global trade, and the best you can do is a little subsidies here, a little subsidies there, but you're still participating within the same framework. That's why they say China cheats all the time. China's not cheating. China is simply doing a command economy. Central planning. The market reaction is the most insane thing I've ever seen. No, I don't think it's insane at all. I think that I think it's very sane within the insane framework that the market operates in. That's what it is. They're so desperate. Yet, yes, 2 days ago, we saw the same insane reaction when it was a fake tweet that caused $6 trillion of value to come back to the markets virtually in a matter of hours, only to have it get eroded once again. Or not 6 trillion, sorry. That's why I keep saying money has never been faker than it is at this moment. It is the most fake it's ever been.
No new Plaza Accords between the United States and Beijing this time are on the horizon. In that sense, it looks very unlikely that what Donald Trump wants, at least both his objectives of shrinking the US trade deficit and maintaining the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, that both these objectives will be satisfied at once in 2025, in the next 4 years. The great question, however, for 2025 and beyond, concerns China's dilemma. Will Beijing decide to stay put?
Oh, what's the bull case? We import $500 billion of goods from China every year. Those items have massively increased in price, 10% tariffs against everyone else. No, there is no bull case. You're right. I'm saying that I tweeted about this earlier today. It is an indication that we are completely insane, that the market reacted the way that it did to Donald Trump because he scaled back on the violence a little bit. I said Trump is such a madman that the markets and smart economists are looking at Trump forcibly severing ties with our largest trading partner as a good thing because at least he didn't nuke the entirety of global trade. Like he literally, I gave an example of just, I gave an example earlier where it's like he walked in, put a gun to his own mouth, said I'm going to pull the trigger and I'm going to kill a bunch of people in the process. And then after killing a couple people and shooting himself in the foot, he turned around and said, you know, maybe I'm not going to kill everyone. And everyone's like, oh, thank God, we're saved now. It's insane. It's insane. That's how short-term, our analysts are. And the way that people look at the markets, that is how short-term thinking focused we are here in the United States of America, where they're like, oh, a moment of respite, thank God. There is no respite. There is no respite. China outflanked him this time around. Trump's issue was that the dollar did not go up when this happened, and China threatened to dump yields. Long-term evens started spiking, which meant the dollar as a reserve currency is already on shakier footing than he estimated, and the USA has far less economic influence than they calculated. Of course, the EU will probably bend over anyways. Yes. So basically, he got at least some of his wishes across with respect to like decoupling Chinese manufacturing from at least like the American market to a certain degree, at least for the short term, with hopes that China will come to the table and meet their demands.
Gaining time until the United States' internal contradictions, Trump's conundrum and dilemma, plays out. Or will Beijing make the choice, which it has not made yet? They have not made up their minds yet, and I think reasonably, will, however, at some point make the choice, make the decision to convert the BRICS area into a new version of Bretton Woods. Just as Bretton Woods had at its heart the US dollar, for the BRICS area to have the one at its heart, with more or less fixed exchange rates between the yuan, the rupiah, and other currencies, and with a view to recycle China's surpluses within the BRICS area, because that would be the greatest and most lethal danger.
What's really funny about this also is that, like, for there to even be a secondary market, like, America designed global trade in a way and also implemented the most insane sanctions regime and purposely kept the global south as poor as they physically could. And only one of those countries that America exploited was able to, through central planning, even development and rapid urbanization, was able to overcome the downwards pressure that was applied. Now, this is China. America created this secondary market on its own through its insane attitude, through its incredible greed. And they're basically pushing this as well. This is at the heart of the One Belt, One Road initiative. This is why I kept repeating to you guys that, like, China's interest in Africa wasn't just to, like, maintain its natural resources and have a monopoly on these rare earth minerals in both extraction and processing. That is definitely one of the goals, but the real goal there, and the reason why their loans were unconditional and removed easily in times of need, as opposed to the IMF and the World Bank loans that these countries were used to, was because they wanted to raise the living standards in Africa so that they could develop a market in Africa, so that ultimately, when push came to shove and America tried to do exactly what they're trying to do right now, as they've signaled since Barack Obama's administration, that they would have a way to move their consumer base and spread it out to the best of their ability to other now developed markets.